Hey, everybody, and welcome to another show of Think, Engage, Thrive, where we bring you the best entrepreneurs that we can find to tell you the good, the bad, and the funny parts of entrepreneurship and all the things that go along with it. So, if you've ever thought about starting your own business, you've ever had an idea about starting your own business, this is the place you want to go. And we'll tell you the reality of it all and how great it is and how not so great it is. Tonight, we have a great guest. I'm really excited about it. Uh, we have Eric Grafstrom, and Eric is a unique entrepreneur in the fact that he's got a startup, but he's also been, let's call it an entrepreneur for many years. Is co-founder of Exit Guide, which we're going to talk about tonight, which is an M&A platform for Main Street business owners. So if you're trying to sell your business, he's got a website that you can do it. It matches buyers and sellers and helps you with the whole process because most people don't know how to weed through all that process. So you'll hear more about that. It's really interesting. And he was an early employee of broadcast.com, which you might remember was, I think that was, um, I think that's Mark Cuban's business. I can't remember, but I think that was Mark Cuban's business. He worked for Yahoo in Europe and California, held senior executive roles with various Silicon Valley startups. But his real goal right now is with Exit Guide. He wants to help those millions of business owners that are out there that want to sell their business that aren't prepared for it. So how do you prepare? How do you navigate? How do you know if you got the right valuation? All those different things. So really has a good understanding right now of that business. So we're going to bring him in. We're going to hear about his backstory, how he got to where he is now, what made him choose after all this time to start Exit Guide. And again, it should be an interesting discussion and really interesting guy. So, Eric, good to
Hey,
have you
Phil.
on.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Great for being on. You got an interesting background, so I think it should be a lot of fun. Should be a good discussion.
Yeah,
But you know, kind of bring us through your background. You've got a lot of experience in with startups in Silicon Valley and some of those companies. So, give us a little bit of a background in that whole piece and what got
sure.
you to where you are today.
I think, look, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I don't have a traditional path. I have a journalism degree, which, of course, right? I came out of school. I worked for a little bit of time on a presidential campaign in 1992 for Ross Perot. Whole different topic. But through that, I met a guy who had in his tiny little startup in Dallas, Texas, and they were looking for salespeople called AudioNet. And so I like to say my entrepreneur journey, began when I was the first guy, that was, quite frankly, dumb enough to sell web hosting to people that did not have sound cards and speakers in their computers. Now, maybe half of your audience will know what that was like, and the other half will say, "What do you mean?" But I entered the early days of the internet when that whole commercialization was taking place, and I was out literally trying to get people to broadcast over the internet. And it was true. Like, a lot of it was just crazy. People, what do you mean I can get audio and video through my computer internet? Uh, and I would say that was, I was bitten, with the idea of being able to create something that did not exist. Um, in the first 1 to 2 years, it was horrible. I mean, quite frankly, it was just awful. All my friends were going off to these great schools for MBAs and law, and they're working at these consulting firms, and I'm banging out cold calls off of a card, crickets on the floor, and just think, am I doing? Fast forward 30 years later, I'm probably doing the same thing. What am I doing with my life? But that took me on this journey of really the internet, quite frankly, taking off and booming. And look, I was very fortunate. So this is early in my career. I had some ups and downs before joining. this was by no means a stable first job for a newly married guy. And from there, Yahoo bought the company. We moved to London, then moved into different roles, ended up in California. And whether I decided to be an entrepreneur or not, I couldn't do that. There was a road to Damascus moment. But when Yahoo started to get big, I got frustrated. And I think that was the time for me to kind of really check myself and say, well, what is it that I enjoy doing? What do I feel like I'm good at? And so I left, before Yahoo really started to have the headwinds that it saw in the mid 2000s. Back up in early stage startups. So these were startups with generally pre-revenue, always close to product fit, and they needed somebody who was kind of a business person, and that was my role. And so I through that, just stepped into various responsibilities. Again, not qualified for. Sometimes having confidence is better than having skills and experience when you go on the entrepreneurial journey. But it led me into a lot of different roles, and I had to go with some incredibly talented people in the hardest valley with venture-backed startups, and ended up taking a couple turns as a CEO, COO there too.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. It's great. I mean, obviously, we look at some of those companies that you're talking about today,
Yeah.
and they're big, and you were there in the beginning, which is always interesting because they scaled very rapidly, and so I'm sure you learned a lot. I'm sure you understand a lot about it. So, then where'd you go? So you last we heard you were in London, and
Sure.
then you
Yeah.
moved back to California, and
Yeah, so we spent 17 years in Silicon Valley. I was living in Menlo. For those of you in the audience know, it's very close to Stanford and in Sand Hill Road, which is kind of the famous road where a lot of the venture capital firms are based. So you're in the heart of it, and part of it is exciting. I've never worked in the entertainment industry, but my guess is it's probably like being on Wall Street or being in Hollywood. There's just there about early stage technology, which it's good and bad. There's stuff about it that's fun and exciting, and then there's also goes on. Uh, Last couple of years of my career, I ended up moving into a role where I would typically get brought in by an investor. So these are venture capital firms to a company that was struggling. And it may have been a founder who just really had not scaled into the CEO role, but was coachable and needed some help. In other cases, these were distressed companies that were way in over their skis. So they had burned through sometimes tens of millions of dollars and had very little to show for it. And the investors who had poured all this money and had to make a decision, like, do I close this down? Do I, put a little more money in to see if there's something here? What do we do? And so I would get brought in. And through those experiences, I learned a ton. Uh, some of the things that I learned, having been through successful companies like Yahoo and broadcast.com, I was in a more senior role in seeing the mistakes that people made with, how they spent their money, how they hired, how they grew their teams, a whole lot of mechanics that you could see with a little bit of hindsight and some data. And so my job was to figure out whether they could be re-engineered and saved, or whether it was just sell the assets and dissolve the company. There's a famous quote, venture capitalists like to bury their dead quietly. So that was in some cases that was part of my job, is to just kind of make it go away. And so I did that for about 5 or 6 companies. And I don't like to go into the details of who those companies are. I'm sure if somebody probably looks at my LinkedIn profile, you can figure it out. But I think 2 key things happened. We were about to move. We moved to Austin, Texas, in 2020 to be closer to family. One is I'm not embarrassed to say, I kind of grew tired of cleaning up messes for millionaires, which is what I was doing. And it was high stress, very educational, but the people that I was dealing with day in and day out on the teams there you know, I'm coming in and having to rip out costs and scale things down and redirect resources. And I thought, I just don't want to do this anymore. And I was in the car, and a story came on the radio about baby boomers who are retiring and they're struggling as to what to do with their business. And for whatever reason, I just thought it was weird, but in a opportunistic way. And as I looked into it, I realized a couple of things, and we'll talk more about some of the data behind it and the market opportunity. But what I realized is the nature of being a I wouldn't say a turnaround specialist, but an operator with, kind of commercial sense and skills
Sure.
in Silicon Valley. I had access to all these amazing resources. So if I
Sure.
went into some dumpster fire venture backed company that had raised 20, 30 million bucks, I would have access to people on the bench or outside law firm that were top flight, just educated, world class resources. And if I didn't, I lived in Menlo Park, so I could, the kid's friend's mom, the guy down the street, or whatever it is. Like I could go get coffee with someone and literally get advice that was worth thousands of dollars about anything from dissolution to asset liquidation to, multiples on a company that, has these characteristics, on and on and on. And it occurred to me, this is just a strange world, and the rest of the business world does not operate this way. So
Yeah.
if you own a regular business coming from Silicon Valley, what I like to say is a real business run by real people with a real offering that generates real revenue, you have put food on the table, you put a roof over your heads, you've employed people and been a part of a business community, and you've never dealt with venture capitalists or crazy distressed assets and venture debt and all the other things. And again, I learned a ton. There's a lot of brilliant people in Silicon Valley, so I don't disparage it, but it taught me so much about, well, wait a minute, there are things here that I think we can take and package up in a way that helps small Main Street business owners move through what is effectively the most important transaction of their career and a huge impact in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. It's a great story. We've talked about this on the show a lot because I mentor young entrepreneurs
Mhm.
and I mentor some older entrepreneurs as well. And there's, it's almost like a badge of honor that these guys want to go out and raise capital from
Mm.
VCs or
Yeah.
private equity
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I, I always coach them and say,
Yeah.
don't worry about that right now. Focus on building a product that people want to buy and try and find your customers first because
Yes. Yes. And yes.
there are good and there are bad points to raising outside capital,
Mhm.
whether it's venture capital or private equity. There are good points and bad points. So
Yeah.
you don't want to jump into that right away. And like you said, it can lead to, complications later on, but you're 100% right. Most of the companies you're dealing with, these are people that have built a business from the ground up with
Yeah.
hard work, with their own resources. And now you're right. It's the most important decision because you're going to sell this business. And that's pretty much
Mhm.
probably going to be your retirement
Mhm.
or close to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a legacy. And I one of the ways is I've moved into this world with Exit Guide. I've joined the local chamber of commerce here and been interacting with circles that just weren't part of the tech startup world. And I would encourage anyone. It is generally very little money for you to join your local chamber of commerce. And if you want to get plugged in and learn a little bit about business and get closer to your community, meet some fantastic people, absolutely, unequivocally, go join a local chamber of commerce and get involved.
Yeah.
What I explain to people, because I get asked, right? So somebody who may own a pest control company or a restaurant or something like that here in the Austin areas, I say there's different types of entrepreneurship. And like anything in life, you need to figure out what works well for you. Don't make the
Yeah.
assumption because somebody else is doing it, that's what you should do, or because you read something or watched some videos or have an idea in your mind, that's what you should go do. So one type, which is really, really hard, is the traditional Main Street type business.
Yeah.
And, this may be, again, the pizza place or a pest control company or a women's clothing store. There isn't necessarily, the question that tech startups face, and I'll talk about this in a second, but do people in Austin want pizza? Well, look, of course they do. I mean, pizza's
Yeah.
delicious. The question becomes, can you deliver a quality product consistently, at a reasonable price, hire people, keep them engaged, and it's kind of the mechanics of that, right? You could pick a bad location and there's other factors, but no one's asking you with those types of business, is there a need? With a tech startup, one of the most fundamental questions that I encourage people to start with is, well, you have an idea, and the first step is to really validate whether this is a business or a company that should exist. And people will say, well, you can kind of grind and will your way into it. And that's actually false.
Yeah.
Because if it's not going to deliver value and really solve a need in the market, whether that's increasing revenue or profitability or solving someone's pain points, it's going to be really, really hard. Now, this is before you even try to raise money. But at the end of the day, whether it's private equity or a venture capital firm or individual angel investors, they're investing in your ability to create a business. And a startup really is not a company yet. A startup is an idea that you're trying to prove should be a business. And that's the first question you have to start with. And it takes a little while to get answers to that question.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's true with most startups, but you're right. There's two different types of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs. There's the traditional sort of, I'm opening up a pizzeria, I'm opening up a sandwich shop, deli. We understand that. Shoe store, something like that.
Yeah.
But when you start talking about startups with creating something that's different and unique, you're 100% right. It has to be validated. And, that's always my point is you go out with your minimum viable product and then you find a customer for it and you make sure that that's something that they want and need and are willing to pay for. Again, talking to some young entrepreneurs, these folks, they're so and one of the reasons that I wanted to do this show, by the way, is because of that, because of talking to a lot of young entrepreneurs who look at all these podcasts about entrepreneurship and business startup, and they think that they're going to be the next Elon Musk. They're going to walk into a place with a business plan. They're going to walk into a couple of meetings with business plan, and they're going to get checks thrown at them. It just doesn't work that way, number one. But you can't focus on that from the beginning. You have to focus on creating your minimum viable product, get it out into the market, test it with customers, and make sure that you're going to get the price that you need to get. You're 100% right.
Yeah, it's look, raising money is probably a show in and of itself. For every dollar you raise, keep in mind most investors expect at least 10x on that dollar.
Right.
So if you raise $1 million, there is oftentimes at least a $10 million return for them. So if they're taking $1 million to buy 10% of your company, their expectation is that it's going to net them $10 million in return, which means that's got to be a $100 million exit. And they also know that not all of their companies are going to make it. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out which ones have the greatest likelihood of achieving that so they can effectively focus less time, energy, and money on the ones that are less likely to make it. And it's a brutal truth that I've seen a number of first-time founders and entrepreneurs go through, which is, well, this is a great business. I'm like, it is, but you don't get, if you went out and raised venture capital, you really don't get credit for a $50 million exit,
Right.
which is entirely different than if you were to build up a chain of HVAC, let's just say oil change, shops in the Northeast, and you've got 10 of them and you sell it for $80 million. Well, you probably own most of that company, and there's cash flow and there's EBITDA and all these other things that not a lot of startups necessarily understand and focus on. So ask yourself what entrepreneurship looks like for you. There isn't a good or bad. There is a fit for you, just like buying a car or a house or where you go to university. It's like there's plenty of good options that are out there. Figure out what's the right approach for you. And, I also am a big believer that entrepreneurship, I started in my mid 20s. I know, Phil, you and others are saying that that could not have been more than 10 years ago, with that youthful moneymaker you've got there. So comedy was my other career that I could have gotten into, right? But it is, there are seasons for entrepreneurship too. And I've had my times where I've gone in and worked inside of a bigger company, combination of very interesting opportunity, but also, you have other responsibilities outside of your career, where sometimes having a steady paycheck and working for someone else can be both rewarding, but also the right thing for you to do personally for you and those that you need to take care of.
Yeah. It's a good point. What does entrepreneurship mean to you? Or what type of entrepreneurship is right for you? Because one of the first shows we did, we had a couple of young guys on, and they are not interested in building a big business that they're going to exit out of at some point. Their focus is on building a lifestyle business. They have a business right now that generates cash for them. They're growing it, but at the same time, they can do it from anywhere in the world. They like to travel. They want family life.
Yeah.
So they're building what they consider to be a lifestyle business for them, and
I love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, we've had a guest on, Joe Rothley. If you have a dog, you might know Greenies. They're for teeth.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Joe,
They've taken some of my money. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've given, no, that's a good product. I've gladly spent on Greenies. Yes.
Yeah. He built it in the 90s with his wife. He calls he and his wife, he says that they're couplepreneurs, but he said, and I think, he grew up in the, or his career was in government, something with the government, and like an engineer. And he did this out of trying to solve a problem for his dog. And they created the product. And for the first 4 years, he didn't take any salary, but they grew the business. And then in the early 2000s, they sold it to Mars. But today he has another business called Yummy Combs, which again is a product for dogs' teeth. But he also has another company called Spider, which are tools that he sells to Lowe's. My point with it is, you were talking about there's seasons for entrepreneurs. He's 80 years old and he's still going, but it has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with he gets inspired with something. He's got to solve the problem, and he puts people in place to run the business. And then he spends a lot of time and effort and money on his social causes, but he's a really great, inspiring guy. But again, 80 years old, he's still coming up with ideas.
Well, Phil, you make such a good point. And I had a friend in a kind of, I would say, a dark period with is the founder of Exit Guide. And one of my good friends, who is also a founder, we were both early employees back in the Yahoo days. In Irv Henderson, he founded a company called Talic. Just a wonderful friend and great entrepreneur. And I was checking in with him of kind of I needed a reality check, someone who's going to speak truth into me. And his question to me was, do you still feel like this needs to exist in the world? And that is a question that I kind of referenced earlier, but is important as people look into this, which is, do you feel like what you're trying to accomplish here, knowing that it's going to be hard, maybe that you're not taking a salary, you're losing out on opportunities, all the things that go into the calculus. If you still believe this needs to exist in the world, then that's important, because that is a question that any investor, and to a degree, a customer indirectly, is going to ask you, which is, well, why this and why now? And then why you?
Yeah.
And so you have to say, look, I firmly believe with Exit Guide that mergers and acquisitions is out of reach for regular Main Street business owners.
Yeah.
And that most of them, before they're even ready to sell their business, are thoroughly confused, have very little, if any, help and resources, and they have tons of questions. And so we want to start there. People say, well, do you help them find a buyer? Not yet. We only focused on sellers today. And so what we want to do is we want to say, hey, look, we have a whole bunch of stuff on our platform, but if we do our job correctly, we give people confidence, we lower their stress level, and we help them move through this transaction, which far and away, most of them have never even gone through before.
Sure.
And want to kind of bring them through this with a level of comfort that they know that they're doing the right thing at the right time, and eventually they're going to get to some form of an outcome. And maybe it's a great exit. Maybe it's passing their business to a family member. Maybe it's selling the assets and closing. Maybe it's selling it to an employee at a reasonable but not maximum price, but ensures the legacy in business and that it's still a part of the community. So it means different things to different people. And with every fiber of my being, I just believe like this has to exist. This just has to exist in the world where we can help what is effectively the backbone of our economy and 30%, 35% of the GDP. We've got to find a way to help these people move through this, so that they can do it confidently and correctly.
Yeah. That's a good point, because these folks don't know what to do. They don't know where to
No.
start. They've never
Yeah.
been through it. So having a resource like that, it makes total sense. So you're right. It has to exist.
Yeah. And back to your point, which is how do you know what you're going to go do? So there's starting with the problem statement, which is, okay, my problem statement was one, most small business owners, that eventually, well, all small business owners will exit, and most of them are too small to access the business brokers, M&A advisors, and attorneys, because their businesses are worth maybe a couple $100,000 or maybe $1 or $2 million. And those folks, meaning the lawyers, the brokers, the M&A advisors, they're all focused on bigger opportunities north of $5 million. And as baby boomers and Gen X start to retire, those experts are all going to have more than they can possibly handle.
Yeah.
So how do you create a combination of technology and people that allows someone to say, okay, I want to sell my business to my employer, or I want to find a buyer in my local community, which means advertising it on the internet doesn't matter because your buyer is going to probably have to live there and run the dry cleaner, wherever it may be. So how do you help them through that process? And, we're learning what that looks like. Just because we've identified this need, then how you go about solving it in a way that makes sense for someone is a big part of that journey. If you're going to move into the, trying to do a tech startup. But again, I'm passionate about food. I love to cook. I also feel like I could mess up a McDonald's franchise because they'd come in and they'd be like, "What'd you do?" And I'd be like, "Tikka masala fries we have now are awesome." And like, all you had to do is follow the playbook, dummy. And like, well, I know. So it's probably another litmus test on whether you're going to be a good employee or you're being a better founder.
Yeah.
But it is so important to start with, as you said, that kind of that problem statement. Talk to customers. Is this a pain point for you? If so, tell me more about that pain point rather than immediately jump to, would you want these three things? Don't even tell them what you're thinking about building. Just get in their head. Like, how do you solve this today? What do you do? If you don't have this, then how do you do this? And what we learned is so many small business owners, they ask other business owners and everybody kind of says, I don't know. And then when you say, well, have you talked to someone? They're like, well, I put out a bunch of phone calls. No one calls me back because I've got an auto shop that turns over, $850,000 a year. And that's just not interesting to some guy who can sell a pharmaceutical company for 10 million bucks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So let's take a little bit of a break here. And I have something I like to do, which is I'll give you a question or I'll give you a sentence, and then I want you to finish it. So the first one is a surprising thing about entrepreneurship that many people don't realize is such and such, and it's important because.
Well, I would say the surprising thing about entrepreneurship is that it's very lonely. Um, you know, I don't, I like I have a lot of friends who've moved on to successful careers in different worlds, and I work from home, and I have co-founders now that are on the West Coast, but uh, and what makes it lonely isn't working by myself. What makes it lonely is kind of staring into this abyss and saying, okay, if I don't do anything today, like zero gets done because it's me. And I don't have an inflow of choices to make a lot of times of, well, left, right, up, down, east, west, black, white, red, green. It's creating my own inertia to move the ball forward and accepting that I've got these mistakes and, trying to share those with someone who is dealing with an entirely different set of stressors at work or in life is really hard. And so, um, I think it's one of the I think it's talked about a lot more now, but it's still something that is not really understood by a lot of people who say I'm going to go into buy my own business or start my own business or whatever it may be. Is yeah, you're kind of on your own for a while before the business starts to take off, and you're figuring a lot of things out by yourself, which it's good and bad. Uh, Now, it's important because when you go through that, you learn how to become really resourceful.
You know, it's funny. It's really funny that you brought that up because I have an agency, right? Which
Mhm.
we it's a marketing and it's a marketing agency. We do social media, we do a lot of different things, but um and we've been around since 2014.
Yeah, 10
But
years.
uh, but but this morning there gets to a point where I've got people all over the place. We've got people in, a couple of different states. We work virtually. We do have an office, um, but when it comes to certain things that happen in the business, I am alone in
Yeah.
that thought process, in that solution process, because I can't tell anybody else in the company because you have you have people that are in the company that are working for the company. You don't want them to know certain things are happening or not happening, right? People who delay payment, for example, which is frustrating to me because I hate chasing people for money, but
Yeah.
it has to happen, right? The accountants do their part, but at some point you got to get on the phone and say, why haven't you, paid us yet?
Yep.
But it's those types of things where you're sitting there and you're trying to hire for growth, and is it the chicken or the egg? Are you getting the growth first and then hiring? Or so you've got to watch your cash, you've got to manage that, make sure you've got the
Mhm.
money. Those are the things that people don't realize. You're alone in that thought. And you're 100% right. I can't discuss it with my spouse because she's got a corporate job and she's got her own stress and her own pieces to deal with. She can't
Yeah.
understand my piece. So you're 100% right.
And her stresses are real.
Yeah,
So I'm
absolutely.
a fan of this, like, well, it's harder for me. Like, I don't know, like everybody's got their own stuff, both inside and outside of work. But one of the tests is, when someone wants to know what it's like, I say, well, look, if you have a job with a lot of responsibility, one of the questions is, are you worried about making payroll? Or whether it's for people that work for you or yourself. And some people say, well, no, like, I mean, it's a, $800 million company. And okay, that's a different set of stress. Like, I worry about that, like you do, Phil, all the time. Right. So it's a survival it's a survival mode sometimes that has to be balanced with, we're going to build $1 billion company, and so you have this dual personality that you have to maintain as an entrepreneur, that I don't think everybody realizes that it's not just stressful, but it's a very so anyway, it can be a lonely, isolating thing when you meet another entrepreneur, whether it's you know casually and in impromptu or in a more formal group. It's good to share those experiences, and a little bit of gallows humor sometimes will help you get through it.
Oh yeah, no question about it. I think the worst time that I've ever experienced, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this because a lot of people have, was during the lockdown,
Yeah.
because our business is affected by the businesses we represent. And if they're not working, something's happening to them because of supply chain issues or whatever. And it was almost to the point where every day you'd wake up and it would just be another problem. And, you don't want to let the people who work for you know, because you don't want them to get worried about their job.
Yeah.
You want them focused on performance. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
it was those stressful times still come back, man.
Yeah, still carry a little bit of emotional resonance
Yeah.
there. Yeah, well,
So I
I gotta
worry about
say,
it, but in a lot of ways, it was, I thought about it and thought about, if this ever happens again, how would we protect everything? And so there are some things we changed about what we do, and but yeah, you're 100% right, man. It can be a lonely adventure. Yeah, and
yeah,
I thought about that this morning, so it's funny that you bring that up. So
yeah, yeah.
all right, let's have a little fun. So come on, give me a funny story from your journey that you can think of.
Oh my! I mean, look, so many things. I mean, look, this isn't a funny story. I'll give you an example of just what it's like. I came back the other day. Uh, I went to go work out, came back, and had sent out an email campaign to a couple thousand people, and it had completely and totally the wrong subject line in the email. Like, like, I can yell at me, uh, but it's all these things, and so part of this is getting you know up every day, moving past these mistakes, not beating yourself up. Uh, if I go back to, I mean, look, I was at broadcast.com and it was nothing. I mean, there was a bunch of funny stuff that went on. I mean, I'll give you one story, which is not business, but this is the kind of thing when people say what it's like to work at an early stage startup. And this is before startups were cool.
Yeah.
Like, and this Dallas, so like this wasn't even so. Uh, we were in a warehouse. This was Mark Cuban had a loft in a section of Dallas called Deep Ellum, and it was, I mean, it was supposed to be housing for probably one to two human beings. We had like 40 crammed in there, and we had like one bathroom, and it didn't have a top on it, which you know visualize that, and it was in the middle of the room. So anyway, uh, all sorts of crazy stuff happens when you've got all these people packed in. And what's funny about it too is also it's everybody's there like willingly too, because sometimes you look and you're like, what do you like?
Yeah.
This isn't forced labor. Like, what are you doing? Uh, Came in one morning, and uh, the guy who was kind of the quasi office manager had set out sticky sheets of paper. I can't believe I'm going to tell this, and it's going to be recorded. He'd set out sticky sheets of paper on the floor because there was a problem with rodents. So I get there, I'm in sales, get at my desk early, sit next to one of my friends, and there's a mouse stuck to the contact paper, and it's still alive. So I'm not going to get into the rest of the details, but this is not how you want to start your day. And how do you tell your friend who's like, well, a new associate at this big, cool law firm in downtown Dallas and this sexy skyscraper. And they're like, we're working on this big deal and I'm working with the two big partners. And you're like, man, I had to kill a mouse this morning. Or start making cold calls to people who have no idea what I'm talking about. What am I doing with my life? So, being an entrepreneur means getting, into things that you just never would imagine that you have to, again, develop a sense of humor, some ways of coping with it. And I'm sure if you rounded up a bunch of the early, podcast.com employees and put us together with a couple of drinks, we would probably have on and, numerous stories, just like that, where you think, this just happened to me today. Like that was
Yeah.
my job. Tuesday at 8 a.m. or whatever it was walking in and, hearing the little, anyway, mouse. And so, there's plenty of stories on the road, and it does build character. It does prepare you for the unexpected. And for me, I would say, it kind of helped me really maintain a level of composure as I kind of progressed in my career, with, okay, well, is this something really that we need to worry? Like, how bad is this? And when you collect these experiences, you kind of get to a point where you're like, okay, look, I understand. I'm not saying this isn't important, but is it critical? Those are two different things. And how critical is it? Well, okay, I fall back oftentimes on, well, wait a minute here. This is absolutely a huge challenge. This may be a big problem. And I've said this is the CEO of, managing, sometimes dozens or hundreds of people and having to bring an executive team together and say, well, wait a minute though. I'm not discounting the problem, but like, look, I have you, I have you, I have you, and I have you. You are all insanely smart, competent people. This would be a disaster if we didn't have this team here to go solve for it. So the reality is we can look at this and say, well, we're in deep doo-doo. We're almost out of money, or this has happened. But I do have a team of talented people who are completely and totally committed to getting us through it. There's not much else we can do other than just to get through it. So let's get back to work. And so it is a collection of experiences that kind of form that attitude for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are some good stories. And
First guy on your show to talk about killing a mouse.
yeah, that's true.
Check
That's true.
Yeah.
I can't say we've heard that one
Yeah,
before,
yeah.
but that is
Fantastic.
true. But I started a business. I owned a house. I wasn't living in it. It was a rental property. And then I started a beauty company, and we needed a place to as an office. And I wound up turning the house into the offices, and we had people in the bedrooms, and and it gets a little different because it's not a traditional office, so you don't have a men's room and a women's room, and it's all these different things. But it wasn't as bad as mousetraps and things like that, but it was just a
Yeah, it
little.
wasn't. Doesn't sound pleasant though. I can identify. I've worked in that type of environment. You
Yeah.
learn more than you ever wanted to know about people's personal hygiene.
Oh yeah, but we were doing the distribution. We were fulfilling orders from the e-commerce and through in the house. We had the inventory. It's beauty products, so very small. We had the inventory in the living room, and every day at 4 o'clock, everybody would stop working. They would come downstairs, and we'd fulfill the orders. We'd print them, and it was hysterical for a while. And then we had a guy who would just run it up to the post office, and but that's how we started. We did that for probably a year and a half before we got big enough to move to a real warehouse. So
And you built it into a real company with, wildly successful too. And so it all starts out with something that is confusing, messy, and filled with challenges. And why do you do it? One, it's a good question, but I'm back to your guy who's 80 years old. People will say like, is this kind of the last one? And like with my wife, I'm like, yeah, it totally is. It's
yeah,
the last startup. She knows I'm probably lying. Like I'll be 82-year-old guy, like, being like, I got this thing and I'm buying keywords on
Yeah.
Google and whatever it may be. I could have a $20 billion and I'd still be doing what I'm doing and trying to make something work.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're doing it yourself, and I mean, you've got help, but it's all on you. And I think there's something. I like the early days of startups. I think that they're invigorating and they keep your brain going
They are.
because you're not just focused on one thing, but at the same time, yeah, it's stressful, it's lonely, it's all the things we've talked about. So
Mhm.
that's kind
But
of
it can be worth it. It can be
oh
worth it.
yeah, no, it can be worth it.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
what you're doing now is very interesting, and I think it's going to help a lot of solopreneurs or people that are building these independent businesses because as you think about it, fundamentally, how do they know what to do when it comes time to sell? You have a florist or floral shop, and you want to sell it. Where do you go? What are you going to do? Run an ad on Craigslist?
Yeah. It is. I'll throw some numbers out because I find it staggering. And when I share this with people, they say it's a big market. So about 40% of the US GDP is tied to small businesses. Now,
Yeah.
80% of those are owned by Gen X and baby boomers. That means youngest is about 44. Most of them are over the age of 60. About 90% of those are worth less than $2 million. So even if you take 10% or so that are worth 5, 10, 15, $20 million, that's gonna clog up, really interesting opportunities for brokers and other professionals to, help those people plan and execute an exit because those are businesses that are lucrative enough for someone to buy and for people to charge hourly rates or commissions and make money. But it leaves literally tens of millions of businesses collectively worth over $1 trillion to figure something out.
Yeah.
And helping them with human capital and commissions and other things is not going to work. And so what I look at is one, I think the market opportunity is huge, but now that we've been doing this for a while, we already know that about 45 to 50% of people who come in through our platform know who that buyer is. It's going to be an employee, a business partner, a family member, or someone in their community. They have no interest in finding a buyer. So tell them that you're going to run an ad or get their, help them find a buyer. Like just it doesn't make sense. And a lot of these businesses are local anyway. So
Yeah.
if you run a landscape business in Minneapolis and having somebody in Tallahassee looking at it, you probably should go the other way around,
Yeah.
given the what Minneapolis, which is where a lot of my family's from. Uh, you're kind of throwing money away. So
Yeah.
what we discovered is, helping people with this, kind of, well, help me figure out how to price this thing. All right, okay. Phil's agreed he's going to pay $600,000 for this. Now what do we do? Okay, you get it. Actually, you're not even started. You still have a lot of things you need to do. Phil's going to need to review some information. He's going to need to review your financials. What type of entity are you? That matters. So our goal is to really help this, Main Street business owner who normally wouldn't be able to sit down with a $400 or $600 an hour attorney or a business broker who's going to want 10 to 15% and say, look, we can guide you through these initial steps so that when you're ready to actually move into executing an agreement or putting that business on the market, through your chamber of commerce, whatever it may be, you actually have your ducks in a row. And it's really underestimated what that takes. And there's tens of millions of people that are out there that have done a phenomenal job of starting, running, and building a business. And uh, I say there's a huge market opportunity, but I have a chip on my shoulder because I really feel strongly that uh, we have a bit of a noble cause to help these folks, with such an important transaction. And I've said it before. What I really believe is our job is to build tools to help them navigate these steps. But what we're really selling is hopefully, confidence and comfort that uh, they're doing this, correctly and moving through it in the right way.
Yeah. Eric, I got to say it's been a great conversation, and the time
Love
has
chatting.
flown by.
Thank you.
It's flown by, and
Yeah.
we're running close to running out of time. Any parting words? Any good parting words for young entrepreneurs, people starting out? Any quick thoughts or ideas?
This is being an entrepreneur is not what you're going to go do in the next 6, 12, or even 18 months. If you're cut out to be an entrepreneur, it's going to be a lifelong journey. There are going to be seasons in life where you may need to be an employee versus being an entrepreneur, but
Yeah.
take the long view, play the long game, and it may not work out in the first one or two. That's okay, but play the long game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. It's been a pleasure having you on, Eric.
Absolutely,
I really
Phil.
enjoyed the
Enjoy-
conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun and lively, and I love your experience, your background. I love what you're doing. So
Thank you. Yeah.
we'll keep in touch, and um, who knows? Maybe we'll have you on again in a bunch of months, and you'll tell us how great you're doing. So
I look forward to that. Yep. Got to
all
have
right.
optimism. Thanks, Phil. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. All right, I'm gonna pop you out now.
All right. Good night.
Yeah, folks, I think that was a really great story, great timing. He really had some great insight, I guess, to go from really big to really small, and then, bouncing all around and have that kind of experience, and some of the stories he tells and the way he tells it. He's a pretty good comedian. I don't know if that would have been his fallback plan in life, but I think he did a pretty good job with it. And again, so just to recap, next week we have a couple of great. I think we're going to talk about raising capital. I know it came up today, but I think we're going to talk about raising capital next week. We've got somebody on who's going to talk about what they look for in raising capital, and how they evaluate companies, and which is always an eye opener. And even if you're not into raising capital, just listening to how somebody evaluates a company, or what they're looking for, or what they're thinking about, is always helpful information, I find. So it's been great. So tune in next week. And again, go to my site, philmasiello.com, and you can download a free book from, which here, you can just click this or scan this QR code, and it'll bring you right to the page. You could download a free planning guide. It'll help you if you're planning on starting a business, if you're thinking about starting a business. Just helps you walk through the process a little bit more logically than some of the other books that are out there. So take advantage of it, and I look forward to seeing you next week, and we'll talk to you then.